Hello, today we're going to be looking at the different types of connective tissues and the materials that make them up, both living and non-living. Connective tissues can be broken down into four classes: fibrous, cartilage, blood, and bone. Now, the fibrous tissues are defined mostly by the fact that they're made up of fibers. Cartilage is made mostly up of a gel matrix. Blood is mostly liquid with cells floating in it, and bone is mostly a mineralized crystal type of structure. Now, the first tissues we're going to look at are going to be our fibrous connective tissues, and they're generally made of three different types of protein fibers. Collagen is a predominant fiber. Under the microscope, it stains pink and it looks very thick. Elastin looks thinner and more purple, and it is the more flexible of the two fibers. And then there's a third fiber known as reticular fibers that stain black under the microscope. Now, what we're looking at is an irregular tissue, but fibrous connective tissue can also be lined up in a regular pattern. Now, in fibrous connective tissue, there are cells that build the fibers. They're known as fibroblasts, which literally means fiber-building cells. In reticular connective tissue, you'll see a number of living cells. These are actually white blood cells known as leukocytes, and they aid in immunity, which is part of reticular connective tissue's function. If we define fibrous connective tissue by whether the fibers are loose or dense, we can see some differentiation. So loose fibrous, the fibers are spread far apart, and dense fibrous, they're packed close together. So if we arrange it loose on one side, we're going to have three types of loose fibrous connective tissues. Adipose, which is actually fat connective tissue, when you're just going to see a couple of elastic fibers in there, just in a bunch of fat cells. You can see areolar connective tissue, which is a very loosely woven matrix of elastin and collagen. And then we're going to see reticular connective tissue, which are the reticular fibers and a bunch of white blood cells in between them that make up things like lymph nodes and your spleen. On the other side, we've got dense fibrous connective tissue, both regular and irregular. Regular tissue is mostly collagen arranged, and it makes up ligaments, and irregular makes up the dermis of your skin. And here we see some fibroblasts inserted. So adipose tissue is otherwise known as fat. Areolar is kind of like a filler tissue. It lines some organs. Reticular tissue make up lymph nodes and spleen. Reticular makes up your tendons and ligaments, and irregular makes up stuff like the dermis of your skin. So the next type of tissue that we're going to go on to now is cartilage connective tissue. And there's less types. There's only three. And the primary identifying feature of cartilage connective tissue is that the tissues are primarily made of a gel matrix, which just sort of looks like a clear fluid in your slides. Now, the gel matrix has holes in it. Those holes are known as lacunae, and inside of the lacunae are little cells that we call chondrocytes. Lacuna means little lake. Chondrocyte literally means cartilage cell. Now, the three different types of tissues can be differentiated based on how many fibers are in the tissue and how the chondrocytes are arranged in their lacunae. In hyaline cartilage connective tissue, you see no fibers at all, a relatively small number of chondrocytes in their lacunae, and the lacunae tend to be in pairs, making the chondrocytes look like sets of eyeballs. In elastic cartilage connective tissue, the chondrocytes and lacunae are much larger. They're more plentiful, which basically means the cartilage is full of holes, which makes it much more flexible. There are going to be some elastic fibers in there to give it some stretchability and some reboundability, and that is your elastic cartilage. Now, in fibrocartilage, the lacunae are very, very small. The chondrocytes are small, and there's a huge number of collagen fibers that may stain red or it may stain pink under the microscope, depending on what type of dye has been used. Hyaline cartilage is smooth and slick, and therefore it lines the end of bones, and it also provides the structure of your ribs. Elastic cartilage is very flexible and makes up the outer ear, and fibrocartilage, the toughest type of cartilage, and therefore is found in places of high shock like your knee joints and in between your vertebrae. The last types of tissue are both bone and blood connective tissue, and they just don't really fit in any other group, so they get their own tissue types. Now, bone connective tissue, this is compact bone, and it's made of repeating patterns of these rings of cells. The cells are living in lacunae. Once again, the lacunae are the black spots, and inside the lacunae, you can't see them, are osteocytes, literally bone cells. Each one of those ring systems is known as a Haversian system, and compact bone is made of a repeating pattern of thousands and thousands of Haversian systems. Blood is simply just a number of red blood cells known as erythrocytes floating in a fluid called plasma. You're going to see some white blood cells in there. They're known as leukocytes, and they aid in immunity. And then finally, you see some very, very tiny dots, which we call thrombocytes, aka platelets. So once again, here's your tissue reviews. We have fibrous tissues broken down into loose and dense. We have cartilage, which are hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. We have blood connective tissue and bone connective tissue. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit like. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.